I have a strong gut feeling that I'm gonna face technical issues today, especially when it comes to audio, because I have been struggling with that lately. But for some reason, I'm gonna keep going. I don't know, maybe I'm in the mood to have a good cry. It's okay, and we'll see. Anyway, hi everyone. I hope everyone is doing good. I hope someone's gonna watch this. Today, I think I'm excited about today's episode because it's very much related to movies, and whenever I talk about movies, I nerd out a lot, so I hope this is going to be interesting. If you're a cinephile, you're probably not going to be learning anything new, because the person I'm going to be talking about today is a very important person in the movie industry. So the reason why I'm talking about Stanley Kubrick today is because I wanted to start making a series of episodes about coffee table books, because I really love art books. I love collecting them, especially coffee table books that have a lot of photography and of course that treat topics that I'm into. So I thought I would start talking about two very beautiful coffee table books that I recently discovered, and they're about Stanley Kubrick. I noticed that I have an obsession with collecting anything related to this filmmaker. We're gonna start at the very beginning, the early life, as usual. I'm gonna tell you all about Stanley Kubrick and his journey to becoming one of the most important filmmakers in history, and I'm gonna make it as brief as I can. Stanley Kubrick was born in 1928 in New York City, in the Bronx. He lived several years in California as well, that's later on, and also in England. But they say that Stanley Kubrick was born a New Yorker and he stayed a New Yorker his entire life. Even as a very young kid, he was less interested in a formal education. He was a very poor student who actually barely made it out of high school. Though in his case, he learned most of the most important lessons in the real world as opposed to school. He was a very free-willed child, and what helped was the fact that he had very supportive parents who literally let him do whatever he wanted. There are a lot of anecdotes about young Stanley Kubrick. For example, a classmate says that Stanley Kubrick would copy his homework almost every day. And one day he was so fed up with him and he told him, "Why don't you just do your homework? Why do you keep copying mine?" Kubrick told him, "Because I'm simply not interested." This is how little school meant to him. And this is how much he knew what he actually wanted. By the way, he was a very bright child. Following an IQ test, it was proven that he was brighter than most of his classmates. And very early on in his life, a passion for photography and chess were instilled in him by his dad, actually. His dad was a physician. He was a doctor, but he was also very passionate about photography. For his 13th birthday, he gave Stanley his first Graflex camera, and that irrevocably set him on his career path. So ever since he discovered photography, Stanley became obsessed with the art. He became the photographer for his school newspaper. He was always on the lookout for pictures that would capture the imagination. His father also encouraged him to experiment in the dark room and to develop his own photographs. Now we're going to skip to the 1940s. And I'm going to tell you that it was a good time to be a photographer. The war was over and people were able to spend money like they weren't able to for years. More specifically for a decade and a half. And every newsstand was overflowing with illustrated magazines. So you found magazines like Look, Life, Harper's Bazaar, Vogue. There were now dozens of photographically illustrated general interest periodicals pitched to various income levels and various ranges of literacy as well. But most importantly, specialized journals, which were formerly reliant on line art or illustrated content, were now stuffing their pages with photographs as well. Thank you. New York City was the single best place to practice the craft. Because in New York City, seemingly every sort of person could be found on the streets. Any corner at any hour, you can see something that can provide you with a tableau feel. There would be some human spectacle or some chance of disparate elements. You could say that what Paris was in the 1920s, also known as the time where it had birthed dozens of important photographic careers, now New York had become. Now, Kubrick was one of those young artists who were very inspired by the dramatic persona of his native city. The celebrities, the eccentricities, even the shoeshine boys he would see on the streets. These things caught his eye, as well as the nightclubs, the sport arenas. And specifically in the 1940s, there were no better place to be a burgeoning photographer than at Look magazine, a magazine that was founded by Gardner Cowles Jr. He had the goal to provide, quote unquote, reader interest for yourself, for your wife, for your private secretary, for your office boy. In other words, for everyone. While other magazines scouted the world for stories on a wide range of subjects, this magazine specifically, Look magazine, it focused on portraying New York City with drama, with wit, with humor. They also stressed a lot on human interests and interactions. And by doing that, they would draw larger messages about society from the actions of individuals. Now, I have to talk about Life magazine as well, because at the time they were rivals. You had Look magazine and Life magazine. Each of the two iconic and very successful magazines had very different approaches. They had their own approach in depicting contemporary life and events. With Look magazine, Cowles, aka the founder, he was seeking a lower yet broader field than its competitor. Life, which was founded by Henry Lewis in 1936, it had a more grandiose mission. They literally wanted to see life, aka their name, Life magazine. They wanted to see the world, they wanted to witness the most important events, they wanted to watch the faces of the poor and the gestures of the proud. Now, you need to understand that Look magazine was a bi-weekly magazine, so the staff did not need to cover breaking news, and therefore they could be more freewheeling in their search for human interest stories. However, at Life magazine, the team was driven by their weekly publication system. Now, when it comes to the stories that Look magazine covered, sometimes it was full of dark stories. For example, stories of unemployment, alcoholism, juvenile delinquency, divorce, and all sorts of stories that Life magazine readers did not see frequently. Now, back to Stanley Kubrick. So his tenure at Look magazine started in 1945. Look had published a photograph that Kubrick had taken. He was still a teenager, by the way. He wasn't even a high schooler back then. And it was a photograph of a newspaper vendor the day after Franklin Roosevelt's death. Now, Kubrick later admitted that at the time he had urged the newspaper vendor to look more depressed for, a more dramatic effect. Now, that's low-key an early example of his ability as a director. In other words, his ability to elicit a performance and stage a scene. So it was this opportunity, this one photograph that he took when he was 16, I think, that transformed Kubrick from an amateur photographer to a professional. The staff at Look magazine had already noticed his very raw talent and his ambition. He was by far the youngest photographer at Look magazine. He had not yet graduated and he was paid $50 per week. At the time, they say that the magazine could afford to take a chance. Now, in the early days, Kubrick was assigned various briefs. So his tasks consisted of a series of photographs accompanied by very brief texts. For example, you have how a monkey looks to people and how people look to a monkey. I love this photograph. You can see how he had taken the shot from the POV of the monkey, from as if he was inside the cage. The monkey in the foreground, as you can see, is out of focus, but you can see all the facial expressions of the people looking at the monkey. You also have a series of photographs entitled Bronx Street Scene, published in 1946, and it demonstrated his keen sense of observation and fascination with human relationships. His images caught intimate moments between New Yorkers, shared in full view, from two families enjoying the sights at the Bronx Zoo to friends engaged in deep conversation. With the compositions that he created, he would be able to take these very mundane, everyday life scenes and turn them into something very dramatic and special. His gift for storytelling was very recognized by his employers. So he was officially taken as a staff photographer in 1946. So from then on, Kubrick was able to take more extended narrative-based assignments. One of the earliest stories that he worked on was Shoeshine Boy. It was a day-in-the-life portrait of Mickey, a New York adolescent who went to school, played sports, gambled with his friends, kept a pigeon coop on the roof of his house, and earned money for his family shining shoes on the streets of New York. The photographs are very beautiful. Another example of an extended narrative-based assignment was How the Circus Gets Set, published in 1948. And this subject emphasized Kubrick's interest in eccentric and absurd subjects. Now, in its January 1947 issue, Look magazine was part of a series on new trends in entertainment. And that project, or that series, it featured Stanley Kubrick's photographs that he had taken in typical television studios. It was a way for Look magazine to help its readers understand the television medium more. And several years later, Kubrick was assigned to take pictures on the set of a TV show. He had to create an in-depth profile of Faye Emerson, a Hollywood actress who became a TV show hostess in the late 1940s. It was also one of those early tasks that foreshadowed Stanley Kubrick's future as a filmmaker. He was able to see firsthand the way celebrities crafted their public personas. He was regularly behind the scenes and on set, so he was able to see up close the production process. And they say that the clearest premonition of Stanley Kubrick's film career can be seen in his unpublished photographs that he had taken on the set of the Academy Award-winning film The Naked City, which was one of Hollywood's first productions to revive on-location filmmaking. At the time of that assignment, Kubrick had spent countless hours on set. He was watching the director Jules Dassin and his cinematographer film on the streets of New York. So yeah, that was without a doubt another experience that had an impact on Stanley Kubrick and added to his interest in filmmaking. Now, in the 1950s, and near the end of his time working at Look magazine, Kubrick explored themes such as teenage love, teenage dating, as well as marital jealousy. So those were three different assignments that he had. He was able to effectively direct the stories of those assignments. And so the people who posed for him were being treated like actors. Now I'm going to talk about a detail that made Stanley Kubrick a bit different from other photographers. And that was his talent in telling stories in sequential images. For example, I'm going to compare Stanley Kubrick's work to Winogrand. Now, Winogrand is also one of those photographers who worked the streets of New York. And Stanley Kubrick's work was usually compared to Winogrand's work. They also had a lot in common. For example, they were both raised in the Bronx, and Winogrand likewise forewent a college education in favor of photography. Now, while the two men's early magazine work can low-key be mistaken for one another, there are still aspects that distinguish them. In the case of Winogrand, he had downtime that enabled him to build his very specific style. For example, one of his trademarks was the tilted horizons and the very chaotic welter of visual information. Now, Kubrick did not really have the luxury of time, for him to develop his own personal style early on, because he had to answer to the tasks given by Look magazine. In other words, he had to stick to specific briefs. So in his case, clarity and coverage were the most important thing. And self-expression was secondary to last. They say that at the beginning, Kubrick's images were very clear, however, they lacked in personality, which is why the more there were of them, so like a vignette, the more effective they were. So this is why he thrived on those assignments where he had to take pictures in sequence. And that also shows his skill as a filmmaker. Because, movie making is sequential art. So you can see in his early work how he was interested in capturing a continuity of action, rather than capturing one image that is crowded with information. There are two examples I'm going to show you. There's this assignment where he had to capture people sitting at a dentist office. So he would capture different people's reaction to this long wait. Some people were terrified, some people were okay with it. Some people were just bored. And there's also a Bronx street scene. Kubrick's camera captured off guard a reaction to a new hairdo. And of course, you have Mickey the Shoeshine Boy as well. However, this project was not published, unfortunately. It was so interesting. The photographs were so beautiful. It was a series of more than 250 photographs, actually. Kubrick had literally followed the kid throughout the day, throughout his whole day. He presented a complex portrait of a kid who was balancing adult responsibilities as well as childhood pleasures. There's also another Look magazine assignment that I thought was very interesting, mainly because of the title. I really like the title. It's People Mugging. And Kubrick's photographs for this assignment captured theatrical facial expressions of people on the streets. Some subjects seemed to be aware of his presence, but others were caught off guard. And this is my favorite. I really like this photograph. Park benches, Love is Everywhere was also another assignment that he had later on. He captured New Yorkers, sometimes unaware of the camera, in romantic situations like on park benches or on the fire escapes. Several of the images were captured with a special camera and with a flash because they were taken at night. His later work, of course, was, as I said before, working on TV sets and working behind the scenes. And that officially launched his film career. So he started shooting short films. However, after completing several of those without profit, he realized that he will have to start directing features if he were to have a serious career in filmmaking, in cinema. So he quit his job at Look magazine in August 1950, and he began working on his first full-length feature film. Now, Stanley Kubrick was very passionate about boxing. So his first ever film was about boxing, and it was entitled Day of the Fight. It was released in 1951. He did not have enough money to fund the project, not even close. I mean, at the time he was trying to support himself by filming documentaries and playing chess for prize money. Because don't forget that chess was a passion that he got from his father, and he was a very good chess player. However, that was not enough. The prize money was not enough, and the money he was making from shooting documentaries was not enough. So his father helped fund the project, actually. Now, his first official feature film that got him noticed and that got him financial backing for his next feature film was his 1952 film, Fear and Desire. The film is an abstract exploration of the relationships between soldiers and an unnamed girl involved in a war between countries that are unidentified. The movie is very old, and you can see from the performances that the performances are very hard to watch. They're very dramatic. They're very exaggerated. However, you really get to enjoy Stanley Kubrick's, his shots, the compositions. For example, what's very vivid in my mind is the scene where the girl appears for the first time. She was very beautiful, and the way he framed it and their reactions, there was something very special about this scene. His second feature was Killer's Kiss in 1955, and they say that it showed his incredible ability to play with light and shadow. He still had no physical resources at that time. He was still living off of unemployment checks. He was just this very intense, very determined artist. He had a lot of confidence and ambition, and he believed in his vision. Now, keep in mind, he was still in his early 20s when Hollywood started to recognize him as a very good director. He was only 28 when he directed his next feature, which was Paths of Glory, and it was this specific movie that brought Hollywood's attention to him. And fun fact, he met the actress who would become his wife, Christiane Kubrick. She was the love of his life. She was a German actress. They stayed together his whole life. So after they got married, he moved to LA, and officially his Hollywood career started. However, Paths of Glory got a lot of backlash, and it was because of the way he represented the French in the movie. And so the movie was banned from France for 20 years. Now, there's something that you need to know, is that almost every movie that Stanley Kubrick did was in a way controversial. So almost every time he released a movie, there was a problem. However, he had this ability to shut external voices and to just focus on his work. He did not allow himself to be sidetracked. Even in very tough, emotional turmoil, he did not allow that to distract him or to affect him. And some say that this might be the chess player in him. In 1962, he released Lolita, and this one was actually scandalous. In its time, it was considered scandalous. Of course, now it's an iconic movie. I mean, the novel itself was considered outrageous at the time as well. Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. Actually, I tried to read it, but I found it very hard to go on, so I stopped it. I think I want to pick up this novel again, now that I understand more about it. But yeah, it's not an easy read, just like the movie is not an easy watch as well. As a matter of fact, Vladimir Nabokov could not find a publisher for his book, not in the US or in the United Kingdom. So it was published as a dirty book in Paris at the time. And it was in 1955 that Graham Greene in London nominated it as his novel of the year. And so it found a publisher. I love the way that Stanley Kubrick's wife explains the actual meaning of the story. She says that it's about how good and evil do not come in expected packages. Some people hated on Stanley Kubrick's version of Lolita because they say it's nothing like the novel. However, Kubrick asked the actual author of the book to write the screenplay for it. So it was a collaborative work. And they say that the script was actually a kinder version than the actual novel. They say that the movie version is more about the human condition than the novel ever was. Some people consider that Lolita is actually the first official Stanley Kubrick movie. And they say that it's a Lolita that only Stanley Kubrick could have made. It has comedy, it has drama, it has serious elements, and it's also risque, as, you know, the novel is. It's very much in your face, and the performances are very powerful. I actually remember watching Lolita and falling in love with the girl who acted the character of Lolita. Her name was Sue Leon, and I was literally obsessed with her. I watched the movie so many times because I couldn't believe that people acted this way back then. Because in old movies, they tend to be very overly dramatic. They exaggerated a lot in their performances, but there was something very modern and very different about Sue Leon. She was so natural in the way she was acting. It was so enjoyable to watch. And there are so many scenes that stuck with me. Like, the opening is so iconic. And there is a scene where she's eating chips and drinking cola with like the old-fashioned red and white swirly straw. Yeah, a lot of the scenes stuck with me. And I also watched the Adrian Lyne version of Lolita later on. I think it was in the 90s. It was also a movie that I watched way too many times. Dominique Swain was amazing as Lolita. I thought she was an amazing choice as well. However, the Adrian Lyne one is very unhinged. It is way, way more daring than the Stanley Kubrick one. Anyway, because of its scandalous theme, the film had distribution problems. Again, Stanley Kubrick with his struggles to release his movies. So the Catholic Church actually has its own censorship. And they started saying that if you watch the movie, it's a sin, so they condemned it. Actually, there was one scene in particular that people were outraged by. And if you think about it, it is very outrageous. It's not something that, it's not something that you can just casually watch because it's very intense. Stanley Kubrick actually had to sacrifice a lot of scenes in order for the movie to be accepted. He actually did not know how severe the limitations were around the film. And he said that had he known, he would not have directed it. Now, his next film would also prove even more controversial, and it's entitled Dr. Strangelove. The movie has a lot of exaggerated performances, weak performances. The writing is not that good. However, the directing is exquisite, as usual. No matter what is wrong in Stanley Kubrick's movies, in terms of acting or writing or whatever, his directing is always gorgeous. The movie deals with dark post-war periods. Specifically, it's about the Cuba Missile Crisis and how if one of the sides had made a mistake, it would have, caused World War III. The movie is actually a satire, but they say it's a terrifying satire to put out there. Because at the time, they were making movies, of course, about the war and all that. However, they were very realistic and they were very serious and dramatic. But Stanley Kubrick decided to go with comedy and satire, which again outraged a lot of people. Young people loved it, however, many people found it to be dangerously subversive. There are actual reviews that said that Stanley Kubrick deserves to be physically harmed for making this movie. Now, after that, we have one of his most iconic movies, which is 2001: A Space Odyssey, released in 1968. Now, this movie would establish him to be one of the great directors of all time. Some even say that with this movie, he was able to write a new chapter in cinema history. Kubrick collaborated with a science fiction writer, his name is Arthur C. Clarke, to work on the script. Now, the film is structured in 4 loose parts. You have the dawn of man. The movie opens with a prehistoric scene. Early humans discovering tools, and there's violence, and then they encounter a mysterious object. It's like a huge black structure standing like this, a monolith. And then you have a second part, which is the moon discovery. Millions of years later, you have scientists who discover on the moon the same monolith. The third part is a Jupiter mission. A spacecraft travels towards Jupiter, and it's guided by an AI. Imagine that they're talking about AI in 1968. It's an AI computer named HAL, H-A-L. However, throughout the journey, he starts malfunctioning in a very terrifying way. He kind of becomes human and he ends up killing almost everyone on the spacecraft. I'm not going to say more. Then you have a fourth and final part, which is the final transformation. One astronaut passes through a surreal cosmic journey and he is mysteriously transformed into his baby self. I know this makes no sense, and trust me, if you watch the movie, it will also not make sense. I would be lying to you if I said I understood the ending. Now, the way 2001 is structured is very telling of Stanley Kubrick's way of making a movie. He himself explains this idea of how a movie is composed of 7 to 8 parts. So if you have these parts and they're good, then you're almost done with the movie. All you have to do is just link them together. So yeah, you see that in 2001, and you see how those parts are not necessarily linked together. Like, you can see how they don't necessarily fit quite well. And that, in a way, adds to the mystery of the movie. Now, I just told you about what the movie is about, at the surface level. But what it's about on a deeper level is, of course, human evolution, human versus technology, alien intelligence, which is represented by the monolith, like the black structure that they find in the movie on different occasions, 2 occasions. And of course, you have the unknown, which can represent the end of life or what comes after death. Like in the end of the movie, did the character die? Did they show us a rebirth? I don't know. It's the unknown. Now, why is this movie considered to be very impressive? First of all, I can guarantee that if you watch it, you will not believe that it's a movie that was made in 1968. There's no way. The quality is as good as a space movie done in the 2000s. Stanley Kubrick and his team, they managed to depict space travel with realistic physics. The way they depicted weightlessness was effortless. The detailed spacecraft design was amazing. The silence of space, everything. Like, you need to understand, back then, they didn't have enough material to understand how space looks like. How the Earth looks like from space, or all of that. They had to improvise, they had to, invent a lot of things, and they're pretty accurate. I love the behind the scenes stories. Especially there's this one story that amazes me, because you would watch the movie and it looks so beautiful, and you keep asking yourself, how did they do that in 1968? And sometimes it's very, very simple tricks. For example, at the beginning of the movie, there's a scene where during the space travel, you have a pen that's floating in the aircraft, and someone picks it up. And the way they did it was they literally got some double tape and they stuck the pen on a clear sheet and they moved the sheet in front of the camera. It was as simple as that. Now, another thing that you need to know about Stanley Kubrick's movies is the use of music. It's almost always iconic. He uses a lot of classic symphonies, classic music, Beethoven. There's a very, very known symphony that that is very recurrent in 2001. And it's the Blue Danube Waltz. If you play it, you will know it immediately. You know, it's the da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. This one. Some movie directors talk about experiencing 2001 for the first time in cinemas, and they say that it did not feel like a movie. It was very different. It was very different from any movie you would watch back then. The format, the pacing, everything about it was very eerie, very different. It was not a documentary, it was not a drama, it was not even science fiction. It was so impressive that a lot of people made this joke that Stanley Kubrick must have filmed Apollo 11 landing on the moon. Now, according to his wife, the opening to 2001 was very frightening to Stanley and his family because they had all these old, film executives sitting in the audience. They did not understand the film at all, and most of them had to walk out. They were panic-stricken. And there was this catastrophic meeting later on at, the hotel room with Stanley. And he was so angry and he was so upset that he lost his voice that night. The next morning, he had to leave for New York. But his wife woke up to this radio DJ saying how people were literally lining up to watch 2001 and how amazing it was. So she wanted so badly to tell him that the movie is doing good. Please just cheer up. He was so obsessive that back then I think he counted all the walkouts that happened. There's an actual number. They say that there were 241 walkouts the day of the opening. It's also a movie that would not be your cup of tea the first time you watch it. Even, for example, Woody Allen, a very, famous director, he said that he didn't like it when he first watched it. But then when he watched it again, he fell in love with it. Now, speaking from experience, I would say that the movie, again, it's so visually impressive. It's so gorgeous. However, I would say it's not for everyone. It's a very slow movie. It's so slow, like you would understand if you watch it. Stanley Kubrick won the Oscar for Best Visual Effects that year, and it was the only Oscar he ever won. He got nominated for other Oscars, but it was the only Oscar he ever won. It was a movie shooting that took a very long time. It was a very lengthy shoot, and they also took over huge studio spaces, and it was a very expensive movie as well. It cost $12 million. The funny thing is, he went from that to directing A Clockwork Orange, which cost $2 million. A Clockwork Orange is also another very iconic, very famous Stanley Kubrick movie, and it's a wild one. To tell you very briefly about it, it's about a very violent young man and his crew. He is subjected to an experimental treatment that is meant to eliminate his ability to choose evil. And so the movie basically raises this question of, are we truly human if we don't have free will anymore? The main actor in the movie was amazing. He says that he felt like he was born to play this role. It was not easy at all, by the way. In terms of theme, in terms of script, the writing is so difficult. For example, by the way, it's based on a book. And in the book, there is a very specific language. It's an invented language. So I cannot imagine how difficult it must have been to learn these new words. I'm going to give you an example. A word like apologies is apipolylogies. Car is auto. Old woman is babushka. Rich is Bugatti. Friendly is drugi. Lip is goober. Speak is goverit. Head is Gulliver. Like, they have this whole different language. The character is a very wicked one. And I think only Malcolm McDowell would have excelled at portraying him, to be honest. Even the narration is very beautiful. Like, he has a very specific voice and he has this very malicious smile. He was very iconic. I think without even having watched the movie, because it's become like this cult movie thing, you see a lot of, cosplay or references to Clockwork Orange here and there. For example, you have like the guys wearing white with one eye that has like very long eyelash makeup and the round hat. It's very visually iconic. So before they started shooting, Malcolm would ask Stanley Kubrick, so tell me, how do you direct? Like, how's your style? And as usual, Stanley Kubrick never gives a straight answer. He never gives you any answer to anything. He would tell Malcolm, I don't know what I want, but I do know what I don't want. Yeah, he's that type of person. So according to the actor, it was a challenge, but if there's one thing that they both had in common, it was a wicked sense of humor. And you can see that in every scene of the movie. It's so violent, literally, like I cannot tell you how violent and how shocking this movie is, but at the same time, how funny the acting is, how every actor, every role, every person you see on screen, whether it's a nurse that comes in to act out a scene for like 2 seconds or a doctor or something, they're all very funny. They're so extra in everything that they did and everything that they said. It's so outrageous. The topics are so intense, and it's about violence in literally every shape or form of it. It's also a movie with great use of music. There's Beethoven in it, and the character is actually obsessed with Beethoven, and it's something that is mentioned several times in the movie. And it's also, just like 2001, it's a movie that is split into 3 parts, actually. And in every part, the camera shooting style is different, and the color palettes are also different. There's a delicious attention to detail and a lot of playfulness. For example, I learned that recently, actually, that there's a scene where the character walks into a record store, and one of the records that you see in the middle of the screen is actually the soundtrack or the record for 2001: A Space Odyssey. I love this analogy given by one of the critics of the movie. He said that through this scene and through this, Easter egg of 2001, you see a director who has given up being influenced by others and who is now influenced by himself. I don't think you would be shocked to know that the movie got horrible reviews. And not only did it get horrible reviews, but Stanley Kubrick and the movie got blamed for horrible crimes that were committed by the youth. They claimed that those crimes were inspired by the movie, by the violence in the movie. The press and the public's reactions were horrible, and they were very devastating to Stanley Kubrick and his family. And he was actually terrified that he did everything in his power to remove the movie from the cinemas. He got horrible letters, he got death threats. He was very worried for his family. Not like it wasn't about him. He was terrified for his family. He was literally terrified to send his children to school. And so he was literally able to withdraw the movies from British cinemas. That hurt him a lot financially, of course, but he did not care at the time. Now, after Clockwork Orange, Stanley Kubrick released Barry Lyndon. And Barry Lyndon was a very different movie from everything he had done previously. It was a period piece, actually. The cameras that he used, the lenses that he used, everything was so specific to the period that he was working on. He strongly believed that when working on a period piece, it's not about the costumes, it's not only about the clothes, it's also about the whole mood that you have to present to the audience. Stanley Kubrick used a zoom lens, which is supposed to flatten out the image, and that will make it look like a 19th century painting. Even when it comes to the clothes themselves, he was very focused on that as well. He wanted the costumes to move and to have life in them. And so what he did was he sent the costume designer, Milana Kanner, he sent her to auction houses to observe the paintings with period costumes. He also wanted beautiful material for the dresses and for all the clothes. He wanted something that would work, very well with the light. It's said that Barry Lyndon is one of the most beautiful movies about the 20th century. And the reason why it worked is that Stanley Kubrick, with his perfectionism, he pushed everyone in their department to do their best. Now, the movie was not controversial when it came out. However, there was also another problem. At the time of the movie release, Hollywood had entered this blockbuster action movie era. And Stanley Kubrick's Barry Lyndon was almost 3 hours, a period movie. It was labeled as tedious and boring by most of the critics in America and England. However, and thankfully, it was considered as a film of great beauty and a work of art in Europe. It was also nominated for many Academy Awards, but Stanley Kubrick was very devastated because it was not a commercial success. Now, the next movie was far more commercial, and it's The Shining, based on Stephen King's novel The Shining. I spoke about The Shining in a previous video, so I will not get into that. But at the time, Stanley Kubrick, when he made The Shining, he wanted to make a movie that would satisfy him artistically and that would also, meet the demands of the box offices. And it did succeed at that, thankfully. And finally, I'm going to talk about Eyes Wide Shut, which was Stanley Kubrick's last film. It was released in 1999. Now, something that you will come to understand by watching Stanley Kubrick's movies is that his expectation of people is very low. Eyes Wide Shut is yet another movie that showed the director's negative view of humanity. It's something that everyone knows about him, is that he had only few people who he really loved in his life. His wife was the love of his life, and he adored his family, his daughters. However, his understanding of humans is that they're very bittersweet. But he did admire passion and commitment and loyalty. And Eyes Wide Shut is ultimately about that. The essence of this movie is telling us about who we really and truly are as human beings. Now, by the look of it, and as you watch the movie, you feel like the movie is like a dream. And I'm not saying it in a positive way. But it feels unreal. Like it's supposed to be set in New York, but you don't feel like it's New York. You feel like it's a dreamscape or something. I'm gonna tell you very briefly about it. It's actually based on a novella, a short story by Arthur Schnitzler. Its English title is Dream Story. It's about a married couple whose relationship is shaken one night when they confess their hidden sexual fantasies to one another. Literally, like if you watch the movie, it's this one moment. By the way, this is the movie where Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise met for the first time. They were amazing in the movie. There's this scene at the beginning where Nicole Kidman's character admits to her husband that I once laid eyes on this man when we were staying at this hotel, and I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe anymore. And I thought to myself in that moment that I was ready to sacrifice anything to be with him for a night. So she's just talking and talking and talking, and her husband is looking at her, and you can see his face changing. This movie is very intense. So this confession triggers a kind of emotional spiral in Bill, the husband. And after that, he goes through this very strange, dreamlike adventure in the city. He encounters temptation, he encounters secrecy, a secret society, and the gathering of this society forces him to confront his own desires and insecurities. Now, at the core, the story is about how fragile trust can be and how much of our inner lives we keep secret, even from the closest people to us. I'm not gonna say more. All I'm gonna say is that to this day, Eyes Wide Shut remains the most terrifying and the most disturbing movie I've ever experienced. I mean it. And I've watched a lot of disturbing movies, but this one is still the most. I cannot tell you how unsettling it was for me. I cannot tell you how unnerving the music, the soundtrack is, how terrifying I found it to be. And everything about it was extremely intense to me. It scared me, it rocked me to my core. I didn't know what to expect, actually. I didn't know what to expect before watching it. All I know is that I was very... of course, I wanted to watch it because it is one of those very iconic movies in cinema history. And I loved the title, and I remember how much I was attracted to this contrast between the visual of the poster and the title, because, you know, it's Eyes Wide Shut, and you have, like, Nicole Kidman with her eyes wide open. I don't know, I just really love the contrast. I was very curious about it, but I will never forget watching it for the first time. And it's also very brilliant, and the last line of the movie is also... the last line is very iconic, and it's a line that is uttered by, you know, Nicole Kidman's character. So yeah, Eyes Wide Shut was showed for the first time in New York. The response was very enthusiastic, and everyone said that Stanley Kubrick's whole attitude changed after the movie was released, and you know, the reactions started coming out. You can see how relieved he was, because he was carrying this weight for a very long time. It was a very long shoot. The movie took 14 months. Even though it's a very simple movie, it's not like there's no special effects, there's nothing. It's just that Stanley Kubrick, because he was Stanley Kubrick, he had this luxury of time, and he wanted to take all the time that he needed, because he wanted to explore every single scene. The shoot took forever. It was a very lengthy shoot. But the very sad thing is that 2 weeks after the movie was released, Stanley Kubrick died. So yeah, it was his last movie. All in all, he did 14 movies. He wanted to make more. He loved being a film director, and he had all these, he had this ambition to direct a lot more. I think he wanted to direct a movie about Napoleon. I think he was very obsessed with Napoleon. But yeah, unfortunately, he didn't live much longer to create more movies. People love Stanley Kubrick films. It's so ironic because, again, at the time, whenever he would release a movie, it would be really bad for him. But years later, his movies would become very iconic, and I wish he had lived to see that. So yeah, that's all I have to say about Stanley Kubrick's career, right from the days where he was this aspiring photographer. But I want to talk a little bit about his personality because he was a very special individual. Everyone says that Stanley Kubrick is one of the greatest of all time. And he was born to push the envelope. He is someone who wanted to reinvent himself with every project that he started working on. He didn't want to repeat himself. He wanted to challenge himself even more. This is why each and every one of his projects are very different. They're very eclectic. He is also described as an enigma. He was an enigma to a lot of people. If you watch his movies, you would think he's an extrovert, but in reality, he's an introvert. He was such a quiet person. He was intensely private, and he did all he can to, guard his anonymity. I think there was a period of time where no one even knew what he looked like because people would show up at his property. People would literally knock on his door. He would open the door and people would say, "Hi, we just want to see if Mr. Stanley Kubrick is here." And he would say, "No, he's not here today." And he would close the door. That's a true story. His wife told that story. So yeah, he was a recluse. He cherished his privacy, and they also describe him as a chess player in every sense of the word. He was both cautious and aggressive. He took great risks, but he would also, evaluate every move with great care. And my favorite description of Stanley Kubrick is that he was a man who stayed quiet, who stayed silent, whether he was applauded or damned. He was very intense. He was incredibly difficult to work with. By the way, I always romanticize intense people. I always say that I'm so attracted to intense people, complicated personalities, but I know for a fact that if Stanley Kubrick was my professor at uni, or if I were to work with him, let's say on the set of one of his movies, I know for a fact that I would be depressed every day. He was very difficult to work with. A very, very famous director and actor, Sidney Pollack, who also worked with him, he literally acted in a couple of scenes in Eyes Wide Shut. He said that a lot of people in the industry, they label themselves as perfectionists, but he says that that's just a euphemism for pain in the ass. And that's what Stanley Kubrick was. But he said it jokingly, they were great friends, but all jokes aside, he was very difficult to work with because he was a control freak. He wanted to control every aspect of the project. For example, after working on 2001, A Space Odyssey, I think it was his cinematographer who said that he swore he would never work for anyone ever again. Because this is how demanding and difficult Stanley Kubrick was with him, and this is how difficult his experience was. He literally said that his level of quality control was astronomically near perfection. That's intense. And for someone who's young and who's starting to work in the industry, to work with someone like that, it's very difficult. His mind was very insatiable, very active. He could barely sleep. His life and his work blended together. But yeah, it's someone I find very, very inspiring. He was very unapologetic. He was someone who believed in his vision, and he was willing to do anything and be anything to make it happen. And that's power. That's very inspiring. And we have reached the end of this very long episode. I just wanted to finally tell you about the books that have inspired me to talk about Stanley Kubrick today. 2 beautiful coffee table books. Everything I told you about his early days as a photographer, when he was still a teenager and working at Look, and all the projects that he took, and the assignments that he took, you learn about all of these in detail in this book. There's a lot of beautiful photographs. I think I shared a lot throughout the video. I think future me will upload a lot of things while editing the video. You will get to see some examples. This is a very beautiful book. And another one, this one is literally a treasure. It's a very heavy book. I didn't know it was going to be this huge. But the second I saw this book, I had to buy it because I'm attracted to anything that's red. And this book is so gorgeously Stanley Kubrick. I feel like he would have loved this cover for some reason. I don't know. But it's so pretty. It's so him. Oh my God, it's so heavy. This is literally one of the most beautiful books I've ever bought. In it, you will see loads and loads of stills taken from all his movies, all 14 movies. They're in beautiful quality, and the book is split into two parts. Part 1 doesn't have words. Part 2, a lot of words, a lot of interesting information, where you see something very precious, like, for example, the scripts he would write on, the scripts he would scribble on, photographs he would take on set. By the way, I am so in love with the pictures that he would take on set. And pictures where you can also see him. He would take selfies with actors, or he would, take selfies and you would see his reflection in the mirror, and you have like his actors in front of him. But I'll just tell you what the author of the book said about this one, this big red book. She described making it as an odyssey. 2 years of traveling through time and space of Stanley Kubrick's universe, where they had the unprecedented privilege of having access to his archives, but also the invaluable guidance of those who were close to him, aka his wife Christine and his longtime assistants, Anthony Fraun and Leon Vitali. In this book, you have access to Kubrick's creative process, bits of papers covered with scribbled notes, photographs taken by Kubrick on set. There are images that have never been printed before, let alone seen. Scenes that were never filmed, retrieved from scripts, Kubrick's notes and letters, his curious love affair with different types of stationery, typewriters and pens. Part 2 of the book features an eclectic collection of material that represents the nuts and bolts of Kubrick's creative history. Essays, letters, interviews, materials that refuted the popular misconception that Kubrick was a recluse who didn't or wouldn't talk about his work. Now, the ultimate goal of this book is to allow us, the readers, to explore Kubrick's archives intuitively, absorbing the various puzzle pieces and assembling them into a personal interpretation. And the author hopes that this is how Kubrick would have wanted it. And that's it from me. Of course, I cannot end it without a quote, and I chose a quote by Stanley Kubrick, taken from the Red Book. Kubrick once said that the test of a work of art is, in the end, our affection for it, not our ability to explain why it is good. I think this literally explains every single one of his movies. Because every single one of his movies, if you watch them, it's never about what they mean, it's about what you feel for them. Now, to be honest with you, one of my ultimate dreams is to visit one of those Stanley Kubrick museums or exhibition. I think there's a Stanley Kubrick little museum thingy where they exhibit a lot of the costumes, a lot of the interior set decoration pieces, photographs that he has taken. It would be a dream for me to see something like this. And every once in a while, I find myself going down this rabbit hole of trying to find things related to Stanley Kubrick movies, because there's a lot of iconic things that you can, find here and there. For example, and I told you this before, his interiors are so iconic. And you feel like all his choices are made very meticulously, like every piece of clothing, every furniture piece. Yesterday, I found this website called Films and Interiors, I think. And in it, you can find all kinds of furniture that you can find in Stanley Kubrick movies. And now I'm scared of how obsessed I am with that. For example, I would never forget the chairs. When I saw the chairs for the first time in 2001, the iconic pink chairs and the carpets in The Shining, the wallpapers. I literally found pillows made from the patterns. And there's also this very funky 3D quilt that you can find in A Clockwork Orange in the main character's bedroom that looks like something that Issey Miyake would have designed, literally. Those are very, very special things that you see in his movies. So I would call this episode a part 1 of beautiful coffee table books that I recently found. I hope you found this episode interesting. I hope you learned something, I don't know. For those who watched this video all the way through, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And I will see you soon in the next one, hopefully.